So welcome everybody to the second installment of our staff chat series here at the Cancer Wellness Center. I'm Priscilla Andrews. I'm the clinical manager at the Cancer Wellness Center. So welcome here to this little experiment we're running. We designed the staff chat series as a way for our community to get a glimpse into conversations between members of our clinical staff as we discuss common issues and concerns and questions that we encounter both in our counseling program, in our support group, and also just in general in our Cancer Wellness Center community. So I am very excited today to be welcoming my colleague, Kim Matthews. She is our support programs coordinator at the Cancer Wellness Center, works with people through our counseling program, runs several groups. So I'm so excited to have you here today, Kim. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. The only thing that would make it better is if we could be sitting in the room together.
I know, exactly. We'll have to try that. Maybe we can do a social distancing thing at some point. We'll just have to be spaced out like 6 feet. We'll do like a wide angle lens there.
Good.
Yeah, I'm up for that. That's good because that's telling me you're promising you're going to come back again, which I like to hear.
Before I leave, we'll see.
Exactly. Well, I think something that I would just like as we start this conversation today where, I asked if we could get together and talk about caregiving. And I know there's so many different aspects of caregiving we could talk about, and we talked a little bit ahead of time about today, but focusing on the experience of spouses and partners relative to caregiving. Maybe when we do our social distancing one, we can come back and talk about the experience of other individuals in the caregiving experience. And as we get started on that conversation, I would love to just find out a little bit more for you, what has drawn you to working with people providing caregiving for cancer patients and survivors?
So I've been working at the Cancer Wellness Center for a little over 20 years. And one thing I love about working with caregivers is I think, sadly, they can be forgotten, particularly amongst the healthcare team. And that's just sometimes. I mean, sometimes my clients talk about how grateful they are when they're meeting with the healthcare team, that they also are addressed, that they're also asked how they're doing, that they are also asked if they have questions, but that isn't always their case. And then with family and friends, some are very supportive and also ask how they're doing, but sometimes they're forgotten and the questions are all about how is the person with cancer. And we at the Cancer Wellness Center talk about cancer as a family illness because everyone is so impacted by the diagnosis. Everyone's life is so impacted. So I really like to know that our caregivers are also getting their needs met. And sometimes the caregivers we see at the Cancer Wellness Center are the only people from the family. It's not always that their spouse or partner comes here. Sometimes they're the ones who recognize that they're needing some extra support.
I think that is such an excellent point, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I think sometimes there's confusion, especially like in my role with intake. People, when they call for services, don't even realize that they themselves can get services as the caregiver, and they're just focused on connecting the person with the diagnosis. And, I think it's not uncommon that I found to encounter that the person with the diagnosis, for many different reasons, whether they're not interested or, they're kind of too consumed by the physical aspect of the diagnosis, their personal preference, whatever it may be, may not feel that same need for services in the way that a caregiver does. So for all of you at home listening, please keep in mind that the Cancer Wellness Center community extends to you as well, regardless of the person with the diagnosis interest in coming in for services. And I think, part of what you just said, I think speaks to, both the confusion that people can feel like, can I come to the center? But I think there's also confusion for people as far as how to be a caregiver, what their role is relative to caregiving. Maybe it may be a new experience for them with their partner or spouse, especially if the two people were live kind of independent lives, and they may need to be trying to figure that out in a new way. And I'm curious what either you've encountered, and then also, what your response is to people when they're trying to kind of figure out their footing, to figure out what their role is as a caregiver.
So it's a lot of exploration because there's no simple, easy answer. As you mentioned, there's so many differences from the interest level of even the person who has cancer, but also their ability to be here. So sometimes caregiving is just emotional caregiving. Sometimes it's about being their advocate with the healthcare team or being the one who does the research, but sometimes a lot more physical caregiving is also required.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much variety in what does it look like to be a caregiver, what's my role. So it's, if we're seeing them in counseling or in our caregiver significant other support group, it's a lot of helping them explore what does it mean for them to be a successful caregiver? What roles are they needing to take on? Ideally, there's a lot of communication with the cancer patient about what would that patient like for their caregiver to be doing, or what do they need for them to be doing? They probably wouldn't like them to be in that role at all. But what is needed? And so, certainly there are the aspects of the physical caregiving, but what we focus on a lot more is the emotional aspect and the role shifts. So I can certainly expand on either of those, or do you have?
Well, I just to pick up on something that you said, I think that idea of it being this negotiation, and that there's not like a one size fits all. And I would be curious to hear, what you've encountered as far as what that negotiation looks like between couples, or at least hearing it. Maybe you can speak to that from when you're working with couples, but even from the caregiver group, what it looks like, what it can look like when they're both trying to figure out what caregiving looks like. And maybe they have the same idea of what's supposed to happen. Maybe they have a different idea of what that's supposed to look like.
Right. So in a couple with spouses and partners, you're bringing in your personality, your previous experiences with caregiving. So sometimes the person who's now in the caregiving role already has comfort with caregiving. Maybe they're used to caregiving their children. Maybe they've had parents or other family members that they've been caregivers for. Maybe they're nurses or they work in the healthcare field. They might have some comfort, and maybe this is a whole brand new kind of role for them.
Yeah.
So we need to certainly talk about those pieces. How well equipped are they for this? It always, I think, gets back to communication with their spouse or partner about how do they want to be supported? How does the person with cancer want to be supported? Sometimes the person who's the caregiver feels like they're nagging or bothering the person too much. Sometimes that comes from the patient, like, stop nagging me. I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah.
So that might be around things like, are you getting up and being active? Are you eating or drinking as much as you need to? And so those can be kind of points of contention. So having conversation around that, how can I support you around that without feeling like I'm bothering you, but really actually truly being supportive, making available to you what you need. If the doctor's saying you need to get out and walk, are you more likely to do that if I walk with you, or if we solicit the help of a family member or friend to walk with you? So really to do a lot of not only communication, but problem solving and really kind of getting to the core of how each person in that relationship defines caregiving and defines the caregiving that needs to happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think to pick up on something that you said there, I think that so often when people come in as a caregiver, I find a lot of times their point of reference for caregiving is as a parent. And I think that I noticed that creates a challenge for both the caregiver, but also can create a challenge within the relationship, because as you were talking, I wrote down the words volition and autonomy. And I think that's one of the challenges is I find we could kind of cleave it to two questions, just broad categorizations. On one end, we have the people who are like, come in and say, how do I get them to do X? The most typical thing I get is, how do I get them to eat? How do they get them to eat more? How do I get them to eat healthier? On the other end of the equation is, how do I get them to do more? How do I get them to help out around the house more? I think they're more capable. How do I get them to go out and exercise more? I think that they need more physical activity. So there is this like tension.
There is. So sometimes there's that, and sometimes there's the flip side of the patient saying, I can do this, let me do this. I'm independent. So really having conversation about how independent is the cancer patient able to be, and then letting them be as independent as they're able to be. How much can they still help with parenting if there are kids in the home, with help around the house, or how much help do they need? And that, if they're in treatment, that likely changes day to day. So even checking in daily, I was about to say hourly, but then sometimes that
yeah, right.
So having those conversations, how often do I check in? How open are you to letting me know how you're doing and how much help you need today? Is it okay if I ask you in the morning, how are you feeling, or is that bugging you? So there is not a one size fits all. I just can't say that often enough. Every relationship is so different, and then every cancer scenario is potentially different. And where they're at in treatment and how they're physically feeling or what they're recovering from impacts how much physical caregiving is needed. So then there's the emotional caregiving piece, which I mentioned before, and that's really about how do you take care of one another during this difficult time? How do you support one another? And sometimes that can feel very lopsided. It absolutely makes sense that when somebody is physically unwell, they do not feel well, they become much more self-consumed. And that's normal when somebody has a cold or a flu, and absolutely when they have cancer. So it can feel kind of lopsided then in the relationship, where maybe the cancer or the spouse, the caregiver, doesn't feel like they're getting the same kind of support. But sometimes they find if they ask for that, or if they talk to their spouse or partner about what kind of support they need, it might be that the cancer patient is very happy to give that support, to express appreciation, to hear how the partner, the spouse, is impacted by their diagnosis. But there can be such a tendency to try to protect one another from those emotions of fear, sadness.
I lost you there. Oh, there, you're back. Okay, sorry.
So different emotions can come up that are challenging emotions, like fear, sadness, anger are common ones. And is it okay to talk to your spouse about those, or do you try to protect them? And that protection come from either side. So we mentioned already the support group and individual counseling. We often do couples counseling around these kinds of issues. How do you both support one another or get support outside of the relationship, or both?
Well, just to build on what you were saying there, I think, I always refer to it as that there can be this culture of silence where things become taboo to talk about at a very time when more communication may be necessary than even would be typical in the relationship. Because so often in a relationship, I find that things don't really get negotiated, right? That a lot of times things just fall into place and it works, so we don't need to talk about it. And whether we're talking about physical caregiving or responsibilities within the household, or emotional caregiving and talking to your partner about what you need and trying to better understand what they need. I think even couples that have a really strong relationship and under different circumstances have good communication can sometimes struggle to figure out just how to jumpstart the conversation around some of these things, especially I think for the caregiver feeling like, I don't want to burden the person that has the diagnosis by letting them know I feel sad or I feel anxious or I need to hear a thank you every now and then. Sometimes it's not even needing to talk about a difficult emotion. It's just about needing to feel seen.
And that is so commonly a point of discussion, whether in individual couples or in a group. And also the piece about not knowing how they're supposed to support the person with cancer. So am I supposed to be their cheerleader? Is it okay if I cry with them? And my response is always, have you asked? Have you had conversations? Because when I work with the cancer patients, sometimes their frustration is, why does my husband, wife, partner always need to be my cheerleader? Why do they always need to tell me, I've got this, I'm going to be okay? Aren't they ever sad? Aren't they scared? I'm terrified. Or some, it's like, oh, they can't cry in front of me. I can't deal with that. I've got enough going on my plate. I can't deal with their emotions right now. Can they see somebody here? Can they talk to somebody else? I just need them to be my cheerleader. So it's both extremes are possible and both are okay. It's just, how do you get that couple to be on the same page?
Exactly. And to feel like, I think they're, even in the situation where the partner says, I really do need you to be my cheerleader, at least then there is that role clarification of what is needed from that partner. So we have a question that came in.
Okay.
So I'm going to just turn my attention for 1 second here to see. So somebody asked, can you characterize what could be called the responsibility of the person to put forth effort within their capabilities to help the situation, to in fact try? A knotty problem, most pressure is on the caregiver, we accept that, but what can we ask for in terms of help, attitude? And I don't know if this person means it this way, but I think we could look at that from two different angles. One is, what is it okay to ask of the patient, the person with the diagnosis? Can I expect them to do things? And then I think there's this whole other thing, which is, can I ask other people, is it okay to need help?
Yeah. So my answer to both of those is yes and yes, and then it depends. So yes, absolutely. We mentioned this a bit ago, to let and encourage the cancer patient to be as independent as possible. Sometimes the patient gets frustrated because their spouse, their partner is always trying to anticipate every need, so they never have to get up from the chair, right? If they want a glass of water, it arrives. If they want food, it arrives. Sometimes that needs to happen because they really physically can't get up or are so exhausted. But if they can, then it's healthy for them to be able to get up and move around and have some physical activity, because we know that's the best way to manage fatigue and to recover from surgeries or treatments. So yes, if they're able to do some things for themselves and to help support the family and to support their spouse who doesn't have cancer, then absolutely encourage that. You also mentioned something about attitude.
Yeah, the person said, a knotty problem, most pressure is on the caregiver, we accept that, but what can we ask for in terms of help, attitude, etc.?
Okay, so many different pieces in there, and I didn't even touch on your other part a moment ago about what about getting help from the outside.
And we can put a pin in that, because it seems like this person seems to be asking a little bit more about, like, what can a caregiver expect by way of almost personal responsibility, or asking for them to kind of contribute in the wake of the cancer diagnosis.
Well, and then that attitude piece, so that is tricky too. That can have a pretty broad definition, and that probably gets to what emotions are being experienced by everybody. Is that attitude about, I'm frightened, I'm sad, is my prognosis good, is it not good, do I know that, am I looking at the end of my life realistically, or am I just afraid that I might be? So there are so many pieces of that to tease out. And can those conversations happen between the couple? Can they have those really difficult conversations about, what does this diagnosis mean? Is there a good prognosis? Are we likely to have some tough times going through treatment, and then we're going to come out on the other side, and then we'll figure out what survivorship looks like? Or is this more of an end of life situation? Those are really difficult conversations to have, and sometimes very difficult to even get couples on the same page about what is reality. And so sometimes it is the cancer patient who might be more realistic, and maybe it's hard for the spouse or partner to get on that page. And so, counseling can be helpful with that. Conversations with the doctor, the healthcare team, palliative care team can be helpful with that. Or maybe the cancer patient is depressed or anxious and maybe catastrophizing a bit. Maybe they have a really good prognosis, but they're just terrified because they just got a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
So, it's a hard question to answer in broad terms, but those are very common things that we face. And I think that's where some counseling can really be helpful, particularly couples counseling, to hear where are you both at? What are the doctors really saying? How do we get our questions answered so we know what we're facing? And then really being respectful of what are the different emotions that you're each experiencing. Is it okay to be sad? Because there are a lot of losses that come with a cancer diagnosis, even if the prognosis is good. We're doing that right now with COVID. Hopefully, eventually, sometime in the future, we'll get out of this. But in the meantime, it's hard, and there's a lot of loss that comes with it. So that's true in the midst of a cancer diagnosis and treatment as well.
Well, and something that I encounter when I see couples is they get entrenched in these emotional roles within the relationship. So one person is the one that ends up getting to hold the anxiety, and then the other person kind of overcompensates by being this cheerleader, positive person. And then that reinforces the person who's anxious to be more anxious. And so, because the reality is it's natural for there to be this range of emotional experience in response to a cancer diagnosis for both the patient and the spouse or partner. It's just, is that getting restricted because they're feeling like they have to yin and yang, they've got to compensate for one another. And I think that is why even just a few sessions I found of couples counseling for people when they're struggling to find their footing can be really helpful to just sort of open up the dialogue and destigmatize it and kind of take the fear out of what will happen if we talk about this, what will happen if I express positivity, if I express if I express hopefulness. I hate using positive, but if I express hopefulness, if I express anxiety, what is this relationship? Are we going to somehow explode? Which I've not had that happen yet, so I don't think that that's actually going to happen.
Often when those conversations actually happen, people are so relieved that they have finally happened.
Yeah.
There's so much anxiety about, well, I don't want to upset him or her. I don't want to they're already struggling enough. They don't need to deal with what I'm dealing with, but I really want these questions answered about how they want to go about this, what their wishes are. And so sometimes it's about looking for openers in conversation. Sometimes it's just about, we need to have this conversation. But even that you can kind of soften, let me know when you're comfortable having a difficult conversation. Is this an okay time to have a difficult conversation? If the answer is no, let me know when that is. Or looking for openers in a conversation. Sometimes one person will throw out a comment that is maybe giving a hint at what they're feeling, something that's a little bit more challenging. And the partner, whether that's the cancer patient or the caregiver, their initial response is, oh, don't talk that way, or you're going to be okay. And they kind of shut it down, not because they don't want to have the conversation, but because it's just so uncomfortable. And they're not sure really that person wants to have the conversation either.
Yeah.
So let's just not go there yet.
Yeah.
But when they do have those conversations, there's often so much relief in having had
them. For both of them, for both people.
Absolutely.
I
There might be tears, they're hard conversations, but it feels like there's some resolution, some understanding when those conversations happen.
you know, I feel like a conversation that I often have when I'm seeing, it often comes up when I'm seeing the caregiver, and they'll come in saying, I want to talk about some of these tough things, but I don't want to upset the person with the diagnosis, and they're feeling really hopeful and they won't go there. So there's this mix of, I'm frustrated and like I really need to talk about these things, but they won't. And then what they end up coming in at some point is saying, then my husband said, well, maybe I'm not going to be here at Christmas. And I said, well, don't talk that way. And I'm always like, well, you say that they don't ever talk about it, but that opening idea of, and I think couples can sometimes miss each other. Like when one member of the couple drops something because they're in a place to talk about it, the other member of the couple is not in that frame of mind, or not picking up on it, or not even thinking about it in the frame of mind of like, oh, maybe this person wants to talk about their prognosis. And so they just shoot into this, often they go right to the cheerleader, which is, don't worry, you're going to be okay, which may or may not be what that person needs.
Right.
And I think one other thing I just wanted to pick up on is that idea of figuring out how to talk about it. And what I often talk about is meta communication. So sometimes we have to communicate about communicating. So the entrance to the difficult conversation may not be talking about the subject matter. It may be about saying, there's some things I've been wanting to talk to you about, but I've been really nervous to bring them up. Like, have you found that too? Like sometimes it's hard to know when to talk to you about things. So you're not even approaching the issue. You're just kind of talking about the experience of not talking or talking around things.
Right. Yeah, so that can be really helpful.
There's this other aspect though, I think of, the idea of, can I ask the person with the diagnosis to do things? I think this other thing that can come up is like, how do I take care of myself? How do I bring that up in respect to this because I think it can come up with like, is it okay for the caregiver to ask others for help? Is it okay for, especially sometimes the person with the diagnosis may or may not be thinking or asking for other people to be brought into the equation, but the caregiver may feel like, I'm exhausted here and I need a break.
Yeah, right. And sometimes the break might be somebody, I'm struggling just because this is probably not even relevant right now during COVID, but usually having a break might look like, can somebody else drive you to a doctor's appointment? Can somebody else sit with you during treatment? And maybe the cancer patient doesn't want that. Maybe they only want their spouse or partner to be the one who does that. Sometimes the cancer patient doesn't even want anybody to know they have cancer. And so how does the caregiver then get support that they need? And so what we talk about is how it is really important for both people to get what they need. So how do you respect both wishes? How does the caregiver get the support they need if I realize I'm going in a few different directions here, but
that's okay.
That line, how does the caregiver get the support they need if the cancer patient doesn't want anybody else to know? And so those are going to have to be some real, maybe hard conversations between the two of them about who can know so that the caregiver can access their support system outside of the relationship. Do they have siblings? Do they have adult children? Do they have close friends that they can lean on? Can they talk to a therapist? Like, how can they access their own emotional support, other people to talk to? And then there's the physical support, bringing in meals, maybe driving to appointments when that's something that you're able to do. Helping if there are children in the home, helping with some of the childcare. So how do you access that kind of support? And sometimes it's hard for the caregiver to ask for support. One thing we often talk about is how what you're doing by letting other people in is really, you're giving a gift to them. If
Yeah.
you think about people that you care about who have something tough going on in their life and how it feels good to truly be able to help and support them, that's what you're allowing other people to feel by letting them into your life and letting them truly support you. So it might feel uncomfortable. It might feel like, well, other people have things going on in their life. I don't want to burden them, but they might really truly, when they offer to help, might really truly mean it. And you start to know who does mean it when you then give them an option to help.
Yeah.
Who follows through and who's able to be there for you in what ways. Some people are really able to be there emotionally, to listen and hear where you're at. Some people can't do that at all, but they can do all the practical things. They can organize the meal train. They can bring meals. Some people are really good at doing research. So maybe you have somebody researching clinical trials or coming with you or listening in now on doctor's appointments because they're good at that advocate piece. So you figure out who in your support system is capable of doing what, and hopefully starting to recognize that not everybody can do everything, and being comfortable with that, like being forgiving of people for what they can't do, but really tapping into what their strengths are and what they're able to do for you.
Because at the end of the day, I think for me, if I'm working with somebody struggling with that, the end of the day is, are you getting your needs met? And so what is going to be the most effective way to get your needs met? And it always surprises me when I talk about that emotional versus what I call task support, right? Emotional versus task support. It's like this light bulb goes off over people's heads, is they don't really think about the fact that, number one, there are different types of support. And number two, the people in their life may be good at one and not the other. And, I've certainly had many people where they're just kind of barking up the wrong tree.
Right.
And if they do a better fit with that, they end up being better able to get their self-care needs met. And I do think too, like tying it back to that idea of, sometimes the person with the diagnosis being reluctant to disclose, or maybe not wanting other people involved. I think sometimes if the caregiver can clarify what they need with their partner, that may open the door, right? If it's not just, I need some help, but it's like, I could really use a meal and this is why. Could we be open to asking Claire to bring something over? Can maybe make it a little bit easier for that caregiver to be accepting of the idea of support. Because really, if you think about it on the reverse end, I think something that caregivers often, and patients can be on the receiving end of, is just let me know if you need something.
Right.
Which is like so broad.
And people don't know how to even respond to that. And sometimes they get angry. It's like, I have a lot of people say, just do something for me. I don't know. I need something, but I don't know what I need. So help them clarify what they need and what they can ask for. That certainly is helpful. But if there's any family members and friends watching who are wondering, how do I help? Sometimes what people appreciate is just that you try different things and see what seems appreciated. What if you offer just, ask, how are you doing? Talk to me and just listen. What if you just show up with a meal? Is that appreciated? So what if you show up and bring your family and do their yard work? Really to kind of get creative and be the one who figures out what you do. And sometimes there's a family member or friend who's the person who coordinates everything. So maybe the caregiver or the patient can say to one person, okay, this is what we really need, but I have a hard time asking for that. But somebody a little bit more removed can be more comfortable asking then, okay, tell me who is offering support and send them to me. And I'll work with them to find something they can do to help you out.
And I think that idea of like the people who are in the outer rings, either who, the people dealing with the cancer diagnosis are kind of needing to figure out who to look out towards, or the people who are out there trying to figure out what do we do. I think that idea of showing up in some way, I think even if it misses the mark, a little bit, at least you're letting the people that are dealing with the cancer diagnosis know you're willing to show up. Because I think there is an element of, is so many people I work with, they're just not used to asking for help or accepting help when it's offered, because the sense of independence that I'm supposed to do it all by myself. So to just start to learn to trust if that these people are going to show up in some way, because some people aren't. I mean, right? I mean, that's the reality, which I'm curious, like how, you know, if what you've encountered or how you respond when people say like, well, I need the help, but you know, I've been let down, or I've asked and they're not there.
Yeah. So it's almost universal that people have the experience that there are some people who show up that they're really surprised by, people that they didn't think were that close, but they really know how to show up, and others that are close friends or family members who don't show up, and they're really sad and disappointed by that. I think that can speak to what is their skill set. How are you wanting them to show up? How are they able to show up? And as you mentioned, Priscilla, not everybody can. Some people are so uncomfortable, overwhelmed, just can't deal with cancer, and they kind of check out, and that is sad, and that's another loss that happens. But others just don't know how to, and how can you ask for that? And you mentioned something before that I think is key in this, like, what are you needing and what are you getting? So are there some people where you are getting what you need, but what you're hung up on is those people who aren't able to give you what you need right now? How can we kind of put that to the background and really focus on those people that are there for you and you get your needs met right now?
And I was just going to say, I think it's helpful to be talking about this now, because I think it normalizes it. People have this idea of, I call it the hallmark moment, that everybody comes together, that all the family bandies around, that all the friends come together, and it's this like kumbaya moment, which is not necessarily true. So I think there is a lot of, maybe shame's too strong of a word, but sort of like, what's wrong with me that all my friends aren't showing up? What's wrong with me that this person isn't providing me the support that I thought they would? When yes, maybe some of it is helping them figure out how do you address it in that particular relationship, but some of it is also about saying, you're not the only one.
No, that hallmark moment is rare.
Yeah.
Most often what happens is whatever dynamics were there before in the family and different relationships, those dynamics are exacerbated when there's a cancer diagnosis. If there's tension, that's going to increase.
Yeah.
If there is a lot of loving support, hopefully that will increase. But it's not, if that isn't there before, it's not going to miraculously show up because now there's a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. And I think that goes, I mean, if we circle back to the idea of the relationship within the partnership or even within the family, I think that it can be so pronounced for people, especially I think if there were difficulties in the relationship with the person that has the diagnosis. I think there being that yearning for an improvement in the relationship because of the cancer diagnosis, kind of, if not now, when. And I think caregivers in particular struggling with the fact that the diagnosis isn't always the time when the person with the cancer or the caregiver themselves changes the dynamics of their relationship automatically. I'm a therapist, so of course I believe in change, but
right. It happens. But it most often happens in therapy. It rarely happens without them coming to counseling and actually.
Oh, you cut out there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, there. Okay, you're back. Sorry.
That's great. So I was saying it absolutely happens. It rarely happens without therapy, or maybe I say that because I'm a therapist, and so
come to therapy. We're telling you, come to therapy.
They're telling me we've been trying to do this on our own. It's not happening, right?
Yeah.
We're coming here, so help us with this. But both people have to be willing to work on making some of those shifts and changes, and then it absolutely can happen. And so sometimes cancer can be an impetus for that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, the people with a cancer diagnosis, and not just the person with diagnosis, but again, we talked about family, this is a family illness. Everybody's impacted. So perspective changes. What people want in life, that might change. And so if it does, and it doesn't always, so if
Yeah.
it's not happening,
Yeah.
that's normal too.
Yeah.
But when it does, then there can be that opportunity for change.
Yeah. And I think a change that, I think it being normal to find the desire and motivation to do something different, but there needing to be some guidance or kind of a venue for that learning to change to take place, which is what I think counseling can provide. I think group can provide.
It's what you mentioned before. People get stuck in certain patterns, certain ways of being, and that just is then really hard to break out of. Even if one person tries, the other one expects them to still behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
So that's having to have those conversations about really consciously making those shifts.
And I want to say too, I think like those shortcuts, those ways of being, like that to me, I see that it's totally adaptive. Under normal circumstances, like we need there to be ways that we interact with our spouse or our household members so that everything is not a negotiation. I think the challenge is now when one of the cogs is squeaking and saying, hey, we need a little grease here, how do you respond and take it to the mechanic, if you will?
Right. Right.
So
now we get a phone number for the mechanic.
Yeah. 847-509-9595. There you go. I'm looking at the time and I can't believe this time just sort of flew by. I would love to just have us close with you sharing a little bit about what you do at the center relative to caregivers and what might be available to individuals who are looking for that maybe extra level of support or guidance.
Sure. Okay. So I facilitate a significant other caregiver support group. It's mostly spouses and partners of somebody with a diagnosis. Sometimes there are other people in there, like a parent who has an adult child with a diagnosis, but Priscilla has recently, within the last couple months, virtually started a new group for adult children who have a parent with cancer. We start new groups when we have enough interest, and luckily we did, and we're able to get that up and running. So where there's a need, we try to fill it. So I've got that group, and then as we've mentioned a number of times, we see people for individual counseling. So we often will see the caregivers or spouses, family members, and couples counseling. And then, as Priscilla mentioned early on, most of our programming is open to family members. So yoga classes, stress reduction classes, anxiety group. There are lots of opportunities for caregivers and family members. So take advantage.
Well, thank you for being here with me today, Kim. And I'm looking at we talked a little bit about some questions to go over, and you're going to have to come back again because there's more to talk about, right? I like to get that commitment before the date ends, if you will. Well, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on Zoom. For those of you who joined us on Facebook Live, we'll also be posting this video on YouTube for those of you who could just not get enough of it and need to watch it again. So stay tuned. Check out our website for when we'll be scheduling our next staff chat.